So welcome to this afternoon's session, which features workers of the Theosophical Order of Service. And appropriately, the theme is Service as a Road to Awareness. Our speakers this afternoon will be Diana Dunningham Chapotin, Tim Boyd, and Vicente Houchin Jr. Diana is our first speaker, and she is the International Secretary of the Theosophical Order of Service, which we will now refer to as the TOS. When I was a young theosophist and staying for the first time at the international headquarters of the TS in Adyar, I learned that a medical dispensary for the needy was operating on the site of the current social welfare centre. Since I had a month at my disposal, I decided to volunteer there and was put to work cleaning and bandaging the infected sores of the villagers. I was full of energy and goodwill, but the work was a little grueling for a coddled, spoiled young Westerner. The sight of suppurating ulcers was unpleasant, and having to inflict pain on the villagers to disinfect them was hard. In no time at all, I was using sheer willpower to keep at the work. I quickly noticed that the line of people at the door who were waiting for treatment, never got shorter. As soon as one patient left with her arm or her leg nicely bandaged up, another would appear at the back of the line. At the end of each evening session, there was no sense of achievement because the line was just as long as ever. I was deeply disturbed by this experience. I realized that I needed to learn how to tap resources within that would enable me to focus on bandaging limbs patiently and gently without even glancing at the line to see if it had shortened. I wanted to understand how it was that widespread poverty was tolerated in a rich world, and more particularly, how I dared to return each evening to the comfort, cleanliness, and quiet of the headquarters estate at Adyar, while disease and overcrowding reigned just outside. It was hard to bring myself to believe that the countless people on this planet who are victims of circumstance could all be personally responsible for their situation because of past thoughts and actions. I wondered where a spiritual path fit into things when the vast majority of humanity is just busy surviving physically. I needed answers to such questions and started looking for a place where the light that theosophy casts on social problems could be found, where the doctrine of karma could be debated, where one could talk openly about one's lack of inner resources for helping others, where the short and long-term effectiveness of different kinds of social action could be examined. This place was found right within the TS itself, in the TOS. I learned that the TOS's whole reason for existence is to help the TS make theosophy a force for good in the world, to help theosophists make their philosophy of life practical, to help them along their road to spiritual awareness. I discovered that the TOS seeks to show that theosophy has light to shed on contemporary issues of concern. In the TOS was found a framework in which social action as spiritual practice is supported and nurtured. I was privileged to be able to meet members engaged in serious service projects and to exchange thoughts with them on all the metaphysical and methodological questions that can plague those seeking radical, enlightened reform in this world. I came to appreciate the uniqueness of theosophy in approaching societal problems in ways that differ from secular efforts such as the Rotary Club or the Red Cross. If we feel that theosophy has transformed our lives, that it has given us a glimpse of what brotherhood without distinction is, then surely we can investigate how it can help resolve such problems as the interminable conflict in the Middle East between Palestinians and Israelis. I'm quite serious about that. We can investigate how theosophy can be put to work to help reduce religious, racial, and political tensions, such as Vic Hao Chin and Rekha, whom I can't see through the light, Rekha Nahar, the administrator of the Golden Link College, how they have been doing with Muslim rebels on the island of Mindanao in the Philippines, conflict resolution work. We can look at ways to introduce theosophical values and principles into primary, secondary, and even tertiary education, as Vic and Rekha and Ruth Cruz are doing, all in the Philippines. We can address the issue of self-confidence, literacy, and economic independence for women through educational, health, and vocational training programs, such as those going on through the TOS in many places in India and also in violence-ridden Pakistan. CVK Maitreya is doing a lot in this regard. The president of the TOS in Chennai during the tsunami relief program, he did a tremendous amount to give the fishermen's wives vocational training, and he's still following through on those projects faithfully. If we believe that theosophy has transformed our lives and has a tremendous use in the world, we can also take such original initiatives as introducing a selfless service award, a selfless service award into the community, such as the TOS Regional Vice President, Mrs. Deepa Padi, has done in Mahabharat, Orissa, India. If we believe that theosophy is of great relevance to the world and practical, very practical, we can help preserve Tibetan spirituality and culture, as Tim Boyd is doing through the TOS in America. He may even speak to us a little about that. There are lots of other people present at this Congress who are doing very, very in-depth and tremendous work in all of these regards. We can also see what theosophy has to say about the place of animals in the evolutionary scheme and how our lifestyles might be modified in consequence. I'm not sure that all of us here know the half of what the international president of the TOS does on behalf of animals and has done all her life. The international president of the TOS is Radha Bernier. In short, theosophical ideas can have a lot to say about long-term solutions for planetary problems if we care passionately enough to seek them. It meant a lot to me as a young person to discover, it meant a lot to me to discover the usefulness of theosophy in these areas when I was young. It meant everything to me. It rang a bell immediately. When I was young, my impression of Theosophists was nevertheless that they were a pretty studious bunch of people who didn't really have enough time to do much outside of the lodge and their own study. But actually, as I gradually came to know many hundreds of members throughout the world, I discovered that in fact they are deeply involved in hands-on service as a natural part of their spiritual practice, as a natural part of their journey toward awareness, as part of their expression of the ideal of universal brotherhood. Some are involved in community service as members of the TOS. There are over 100 active TOS groups in India alone. Some are involved in community service as members of the TS. Almost all are involved in service simply as human beings and private citizens. At this Congress, I discovered the Eco-Sophia project of Bodewijn Haas, for example, which is an example of a citizens' initiative, a private citizens' initiative to reach out into the community with the principles of Theosophy. Whatever our type of involvement in uplifting the planet as a theatre for evolution, all of us undoubtedly have experiences to share of how service has brought us a measure of spiritual awareness, how it has helped us to develop a sense of brotherhood. We could probably also talk at length about the character weaknesses, the resistances, the doubts, the strong emotions, and the compulsive needs that act as inner barriers to truly effective service. The American spiritual teacher Ram Dass says that those of us who choose to enter the arena of social action must learn to go deep to the place where we are one with a capital O. And that vision must be profound and all-inclusive, an affirmation of heart and soul. It must be strong enough to stay alive, often under the worst conditions. I'd just like to mention that again. Ram Dass talks about the fact that if we're going to enter the arena of social action, we must learn to go deep to the place where we are one, if we're going to keep that vision alive. And he says that that will help us to stay strong even in the worst conditions. Now, for myself, I wouldn't say that I've served in the worst conditions by any means, but I've been in some scary ones at times, and they have tested in their little way my capacity to stay connected with the one. My husband Michel and I live in an outer suburb of Paris where poverty and unemployment are high, and where substandard immigrant housing is common. Social unrest is the result. Do you remember the riots that took place in France a few years ago where thousands of cars were burned? Any of you remember that? Say yes. Yes. Well, actually, some of those riots took place right in our town. We could see them from our balcony window on a high-rise building. Well, Michelle and I have had to intervene in a number of unpleasant incidents over the years, that is. Not every week, of course. And let me tell you, you don't have time to stop and meditate first. Michelle and I are also very involved in animal rights work. Most of our actions to promote vegetarianism in Paris have taken place very harmoniously and with a good response from the public. But sometimes we've actually been abused, and on a couple of times people have become outright aggressive. These are testing moments for remaining brotherly, and one always returns to Theosophy as an ethical and spiritual reference point afterwards. Do you remember when the Olympic Games were about to start in Beijing? When was it? In 2008, perhaps? And the Chinese military had just invaded Tibet and been suppressing people, repressing the people. Well, there was a lot of unhappiness about that around the world. And do you remember that people came out in the streets wherever the Olympic flame was carried to protest? Well, I joined the tens of thousands who came out in the streets of Paris to show solidarity for Tibet when the Olympic flame was carried along the streets. And at one point, when the official cortege was close, a French policeman, under the orders of the Chinese police, suddenly rushed at me and grabbed my Tibetan flag and ripped it out of my hands, and it was quite violent. Well, I would like to say that I had a hard time keeping my inner connection with the One then. And if you would like to donate €5 to the TOS, I'll tell you the end of the story. Actually, I could relate many small incidents in the area of personal social activism alone. 20 years ago, it was not a good thing to do in France to protest against nuclear testing when Monsieur Président Chirac was doing the bombs at Mururoa Atoll in the Pacific. That was quite scary too. Well, the point of what I'm saying in mentioning these little experiences is that I want to say that one learns only little by little in organising and participating in protest events that to stay in control of oneself in all circumstances, one has to train oneself to look squarely at one's emotions and to look at one's compulsions that create unskillful behaviour on the spur of the moment in a crisis like that. And also, one has to learn to look behind one's emotions and one's compulsions. Anyone engaged in service, all of you will know that you have to you have to be aware of, own up to feelings of, the very natural feelings of indignation, such as I felt when the policeman ripped my flag out of my hands. And you have to look closely at admit to feelings of anxiety and guilt, discomfort, tremendous general fatigue, impatience, even discouragement. You have to admit to these emotions, and they're very natural. But I'd like to suggest that we also need to look behind these feelings. We often find certain fears behind these feelings. Fear of loss of control, of powerlessness, of having our heart broken, and ultimately the fear of extinction. I think that awareness at this level allows the release of the energy we need for genuine spiritual service. Awareness at this level allows us to keep before us that profound and all-inclusive vision of the One of which Ram Dass speaks. Now, demonstrating in the streets of Paris may seem to you quite remote from the kind of service that TOS and TS members habitually engage in. But the same need to look at our inner barriers applies. Maybe, for example, we keep putting off going to visit an elderly, bedridden friend in a rest home, not just because of the difficulty of masking our sadness for them, not just because of the difficulty of making conversation. Maybe underneath we are being confronted with the terrifying spectre, is that how you pronounce it? Spectre? Of our own loss of control, of our own helplessness, and ultimately, above all, of our own abandonment. Perhaps awareness at this level is the nitty-gritty of learning to be brotherly. I hope that, like me, you can find within the TOS and the TS support and even counsel when you encounter problems in your service work. I hope you find some answers to your metaphysical and social questions and to your spiritual aspirations. I hope you can find resources and activities of real practical use in working for the idea of universal brotherhood. This is what the TOS tries to help the TS to provide. The TOS's international website is set up with this in mind. We also publish an electronic newsletter in English for every 2 months, for which you can sign up if you wish. Now, the key addresses are on a little white slip of paper on some of the chairs in this room, and they're also on the speaker there. I've put it up on the speaker, so you can come up and write down the key addresses if you wish. In short, the TOS is here to support the TS in its work of bringing the theosophical message to all. It is here to support you in discovering the joy that arises from service grounded in spiritual aspiration. The TS is here to help you along the road to awareness that we're all treading together.